Yeah.
Yeah, or maybe do some the 감자 song.
No, please. We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Making news just for you. It's March 22nd here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Seong.
Good morning, yeah.
And Now Song. Hi, everyone. Both are here to speak on behalf of those in their 20s and 30s. Now, we'll first start with our news feed. Let's take a look at the top trending hashtags and news items that have shaken up social media over the past 24 hours. The first hashtag for your news feed of the day is 불구리. 불구리 is a special ramyeon snack that one of BTS's members, Jungkook, shared with fans. It's a combination of 불닭 spicy chicken noodles and noguri ramen, and the maker of noguri ramen, Nongshim, was quick enough to register this name as a trademark with the Korean Intellectual Property Office. Nongshim explained this was to prevent any other company from commercializing their noguri ramen, and added that it was very unlikely that 불구리 would be made into an actual product because that would require a collab with Samyang Food. But some fans criticized Nongshim, saying that if anyone were to own the trademark, it should have been Jungkook. The second hashtag is UNSC. The UN Security Council has failed yet again to adopt a resolution on North Korea's latest ICBM launch. The meeting was held Monday local time as countries like South Korea, the US, and Japan condemned Pyongyang's provocations. China and Russia, on the other hand, blamed South Korea-US military drills for the North's actions. The last hashtag is no mask. From this Monday, people in Korea were allowed to take off their face masks on public transport as part of the government's efforts to ease COVID-19 regulations. But as many local media outlets and social media users pointed out, hardly anybody took their masks off inside subways and buses, and most said that it was because they were so used to wearing masks for the past 2.5 years, and partly because of the fine dust in the air this week. Now let's expand the news feed to the studio. I would like to hear what our young panelists have to say about the second hashtag, UNSC. So now, what do you think about the UNSC's continuous failure, I guess, to bring North Korea out to the table? And as a millennial, how frequently do you search up North Korea?
Well, this doesn't seem very surprising or like it's news because it's been on repeat like a broken record and the resolution isn't effective, obviously, and it doesn't seem to change much. And to be completely honest, this is why I don't really look up political and diplomatic issues on North Korea because, it doesn't really change much over the times. But, I've always been fascinated with the country of North Korea as the country, the culture, and the linguistical differences that we have from the North and South. And I think that's how a lot of younger generation are. They're more interested in North Korea as a country and their culture.
Definitely. And just an update for our viewers as to how much of a nuclear threat North Korea has been to the global community. Just a few days ago, North Korea fired yet another short-range ballistic missile toward the East Sea, and this came just a week after the North fired a Hwasong-17 ICBM. So Seong, apart from its nuclear threat, what are some issues Pyongyang brings up for the international community, and are there any that caught your attention?
Yeah, just before I go into that, I would like to quickly mention about the UNSC resolution and the failure of it. The main problem is that, it's not just about the Western countries. It has a diverse range of interests. Russia and China also have veto as well. So that often, blockades the actual resolution from going forward.
Definitely.
We've got to think about the whole, geopolitical tension rather than just what we believe as sort of, Western allies as well.
Yeah.
And now moving on to the points about Pyongyang, other than nuclear, plans and to missile launches, testing and everything, North Korea has been criticized by the international community for, decades for its human rights abuses, including forced labor, political repression, and restrictions of freedom of speech, assembly, and religion. The country's government has been accused of widespread human rights violation, including torture, public executions, imprisonment of political dissidents, foreign journalists as well, and other individuals who are deemed a threat to the regime. Additionally, North Korea has been accused of engaging in cyber attacks internationally, counterfeiting, and other illicit activities to fund its nuclear program and evade international sanctions. These issues have been the subject of international condemnation and sanctions for the past many years, as we've seen recently as well with the most recent UNSC assembly, as well as efforts to engage with North Korea to address its human rights record and other concerns.
And I think a lot of us in the younger generation are really fixated on the human rights violations that the North has been continuously showing. But we've also been seeing regular provocations from Pyongyang. Meanwhile, the country still suffers from critical humanitarian issues, like Xiong mentioned, like starvation. And this requires attention and help of the international community. So we've prepared a very similar topic for you. Take a look at the screen.
Just 3 months into the new year, North Korea has not just once or twice, but again and again broken the UN Security Council resolutions. This matched experts' concerns that the North would continue its major provocations from last year. In 2022, Pyongyang fired a total of 68 missiles, including 8 ICBMs. The North is launching rocket after rocket, despite people there being on the brink of starvation. News outlets reported that Pyongyang has even prepared cutting food rationing to soldiers and starving inmates at prisons due to deepening food shortages across the country. The United Nations and South Korean authorities cited satellite images and trade data to suggest that the North's food supply has dropped below the minimum amount to satisfy human needs and will therefore lead to a jump in deaths. They also analyzed this to be from 3 years of closed borders and self-isolation due to the pandemic. Even before the COVID-19 outbreak, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization found nearly half of the North Korean population to be undernourished. Today, NewsGen aims to answer 3 questions. 1. While Pyongyang might have only itself to blame for its food shortage problem, should people there have to suffer and starve? What are Millennials and Gen Z saying about this? 2. Should South Korea prioritize helping its brother country North Korea with its humanitarian crisis, despite ongoing provocations and war? 3. How do Millennials, Gen Z, and Korea feel about the North Korean regime and North Koreans respectively?
As we just saw, North Korea is suffering with the most severe food insecurity crisis since its famine in the 90s. And the North's economy has been withering as the regime chose to self-isolate itself during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is why the international community is still finding ways to help the reclusive state despite ongoing nuclear missile threats. So here in the studio, what do you guys think about the core of North Korea's humanitarian crisis, which is a lack of food? And do you think countries like South Korea should at least help the people in the North by providing food?
Yeah, I mean, to an extent, yes. Humanitarian aid, especially food aid, I think is a reasonable measure to be given from South Korea to North Korea. South Korea, especially last year, had a surplus of rice production. And I think things like that could be definitely made to good use by sending it to the North Korean brothers, I guess, in the sense for now. As well as according to the Rural Development Administration, North Korea's food crop production was estimated at only about 4.51 million tons. This figure is 180,000 tons less from 2021 due to bad weather and lack of fertilizers. North Korea launched at least 70 missiles last year. The cost estimated around $200 million, which can buy up to 500,000 tons of rice that can be eaten for 46 days by the entire North Korean population. And that can also cover more than 60% of the food shortage expected for this year.
Right, so it makes you think about the priorities the North is trying to put. And now, what do you think? Should countries like South Korea at least try to help the people there?
Yeah, and of course, humanitarian aid is always needed. However, like we've been talking about, there are some concerns with, helping North Korea in this aspect. While Xiong mentioned that a lot of these funds are delivered through NGOs, it's, very not common to see the follow-up of where these go, if it actually goes to the people that need them.
But what do most of them think about assisting North Korea even when we're still technically at war?
Many of the younger generation are quite indifferent about the issue of North Korea in general. And like we mentioned, the older generation had this war that they experienced on a personal level. And they did also get the education of unification is our biggest wish kind of thing. The younger generation of Koreans don't really have that emotional tie of brotherhood with them. They consider North Korea to be from the same root, but a completely different country. So I think the other nations that do need humanitarian aid, the Millennials and Gen Z, are open to going out there and helping, but that emotional bond, the brotherly bond to prioritize North Korea over other nations is just not there.
That brotherly bond and prioritization, I think that's a very fascinating point now. So do you think we should prioritize helping North Korea over other countries, especially with, like, as you mentioned, we have brother countries like Turkey, for instance, and they've recently been struck with like major earthquakes. What do you think about this?
I mean, I think diplomatic dynamics are very important and which each nation should be considered on its own, but Turkey has actually shared a long history of brotherhood with South Korea and ironically fighting against North Korea with the South Koreans in the Korean War. As tensions have been rising with the missile launches recently, I believe that many younger South Koreans are feeling a little less keen on sending aid towards North Korea. And like I mentioned, I think to know North Korea, you need to understand the people, but there's just no connection there for people to have that emotional bond that we were talking about.
Right, and Xiong, I'd like to ask you the same question. Should we help Pyongyang because of our geopolitical or historical ties? And from a diplomatic perspective, how would this benefit South Korea?
Yeah, I mean, this year, 2023, actually marks the 70th year since the peace truce, not an end of war, but truce signed with North Korea. I mean, there has been a tight geopolitical tension throughout the 70 years as well, with imminent threats of war happening at our doorsteps, with the older generation experiencing things like, war alarms and every now and then, with the occasional sort of trainings in preparation for war as well. Helping Pyongyang definitely is, for that reason, inevitably had political implications all the time. Sending multi-food aid, humanitarian aid also implied wish for a bilateral or multilateral summit meetings that sometimes have been successful in the past. Funnily enough, pre-2000s, Japan was the major export destination of North Korea. However, from 2010, China became virtually the only export destination, at around 80% of all goods and services produced in North Korea going directly to the Chinese markets. And I mean, thinking about the geopolitical tension, I think is important to mention here. With the recent provocations from Russia as well in Ukraine, and China becoming a larger player in the region, and countries like Japan and South Korea historically being a US ally, there's huge amount of tension that's been going on. And North Korea definitely has a historical legacy with the Chinese Communist Party as well. And I think those are the things we should be thinking about in terms of diplomatic relations. It's more complex than we would actually be able to think. And I mean, so in that sense, I think humanitarian aid is a viable option. But in the mention of diplomatic tensions and things like that, geopolitical tensions, I think we should give it time and figure out our stance and see how the regime acts as well.
They should be tackled separately, right?
Yes.
All right. So let's now use this time to hear from a North Korean defector and find out just how severe food insecurity is there, and also find out what North Koreans think of foreign aid, especially when it comes from their neighbor, South Korea. We're now going to be hearing from a North Korean defector and find out how bad the food shortage problem is there. It's Pagani, who's also a human rights advocate. Uni, it's actually our second time having you on the show. Great to have you back.
Thank you for having me again.
All right, Uni, I'd like to ask you the first question. You defected to South Korea back in 2012, and while you were still in North Korea, did you experience or witness starvation or severe hunger? How bad is the food insecurity crisis in North Korea?
I can obviously say that as current food crisis of North Korea is extremely serious, that the severity of the situation is evidenced that by the noticeable weight loss of Kim Jong-un nowadays, which some analysts interpret as a sign of the dire food situations in the country. It's believed that this previous corpulence had become a political liability, leading him to lose weight intentionally. Because I vividly remember when I was in North Korea, while I was watching North Korean news with my family members, my dad obviously said, just certainly said that if our leader sacrificed for our people without eating proper meal, proper sleep, why he looks like a pig? That's perspective of North Koreans towards the leader of North Korea. So when I was in North Korea, I obviously witnessed that many people died on the streets due to hunger. There were frequent heavy rains that would wash away the many houses. That can people face food crisis and financial difficulties. And even my friends in elementary school had to help their mothers with the economy activities. Instead of going to school to study, they are only 8 or 9 years old.
Yes, I guess the Great Flood of 1995, which started the South Korean humanitarian aid to North Korea, is something that you've been mentioning with the heavy rains as well. But Eunhye, here's a question that represents some of the concerns of the younger generation, like me and Nael mentioned earlier. Do food supplies or other goods from foreign aid actually reach to the people of North Korea?
I can say there is probability because when I was in orphanage, I and other orphans were received snacks and supplies from UN. So when I was young and when I was in orphanage, we think about the UN as like our hero that could help us to survive in that country. So there is probability. But I can say that the effectiveness of the human aid to residents in North Korea cannot be fully operated because of the North Korean government's opaque political systems and a lot of corruptions there.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure that ensure that this human aid can be reached out to residents in North Korea who need it most.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the effectiveness of it. So what would be the most appropriate and effective way to help North Korea and people in North Korea?
To be honest, it would be great if we reach out the bottom of people who need it most. However, because of the North Korean, the political situations with the other countries cannot be fully, as I mentioned before. So I don't know which is the best and effective way. But when we negotiate with the North Korean government, we have to make sure that their efforts should be made to ensure that North Korean people can get that receive humanitarian aid from the international organizations.
And currently a lot of non-governmental international organizations like the WFP or the WHO are helping North Korea, but let's see if we can better the ways that it actually reaches the residents.
Thank you very much, Eunhye.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Eunhye. All right, now any points that fascinated you two in the studio among Eunhye's comments?
Yeah, I mean, as you've just mentioned as well, the WFP, UNICEF, and WHO are the three main international organizations that sends foreign aid, humanitarian aid to North Korean people. I was actually surprised from Eunhye, have had a childhood experience of actually receiving the UN supplies and having been fed even at an orphanage as well with those supplies. So I guess to an extent, a lot of, most of the actual goods would reach the people that are in need as well.
Definitely, and Nael?
Yeah, I mean, I think just hearing her personal experience makes me connect with her and connect with people of North Korea on a more human level. And yeah, I was actually also surprised to hear that this is actually going towards the people in North Korea. So my heart has been opened a little bit more towards that.
That's good. Your horizons have been opened.
Yeah.
And all right, let's now hear from our viewers on what they have to say about our discussion topic of the day. So we asked them whether we should provide humanitarian aid, and here's what they had to say. So Cyrus John said, we're talking about the people of North Korea who need our help. It's better to send them food supplies than money. Ho Sang-che says, as a South Korean, if North Korea doesn't shoot some ballistic missiles, I can help them. And Tiras Bell says, I think that the Unification Ministry should continue to extend this olive branch as a good gesture. That piece is always on the table. Now, Xiong, very briefly, which comment fascinated you?
I mean, Cyrus John, I think definitely I could relate to. Sending money will definitely go directly towards the weapons program.
Right.
Any cash support goes to, back a few years back, I think the cash support the North Koreans received, and the first thing Kim Jong-un did was buy a white horse. Really expensive breed as well.
Oh.
And that got a lot of criticism from the international community as well. So I think it makes more sense to give in humanitarian aid terms actual goods rather than actual funds and assets that could be used for other purposes.
And I think our generation is really fixated on where this money and assistance goes, right? So I would now like to end our discussion off by leaving our final thoughts on what we'd like to see regarding the two Korea's relations and where assistance goes with now.
I truly hope that we have a better relationship in the future with North Korea, that it would be more conversational than just passive aggressive things that just get nowhere. And while political gestures are important and necessary, the critical thing is, like we talked with Uni today, that we connect with North Koreans and North Korea on a human level, get to know them without any censorship. And North Koreans need to do the same with South Korea, get to know each other. And I think that's when, the heart starts to open.
Any thoughts you'd like to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely transparency is the most important thing in giving humanitarian aid, even regardless of where it's being given. North Korea is definitely a good case. But I think the third generation Kim regime of North Korea is becoming more and more unstable at this point. An increasing majority of North Koreans now have access to the internet partially. People especially who trade with China along the borders. So they are aware of what's going on in the Western world as well as the living standards in South Korea. And I think it might be a good cause if the North Koreans themselves can have some sort of revolution or come together under a civil action and try to actually overthrow the communist dictatorship, if I say. And I think that may be the most peaceful way of reunification for the two Koreas and avoiding the cost of, the dire cost of actual physical warfare.
You're definitely not alone on that. A lot of the millennials and Gen Z here are thinking of ways to help and rescue the people of North Korea. All right, and we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you the topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiang.
My pleasure, Ian.
And Mal Song. No problem. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.